Yeah, ahoy. Greetings, world. Probably people on LinkedIn. Welcome to the Bat Cave with Dale Harrison. Dale, now last time we were talking, I was thoroughly intrigued by your setup here. You're in a wait a minute, a shipping container, is that right?
Nope. Meatpacking plant.
Meat packing plant. Okay, I was it was
It's
either
like an
shipping container or meat packing.
87-year-old converted industrial space. And this was originally a minus 20 degree flash freezer. So the room goes, you can see all the way to the back. The room goes back 36 feet behind me, and it's 6 feet wide and 11-foot ceilings with 2 foot thick walls.
Do you ever get claustrophobic in there? Like, how do you
Nah,
how do you
plenty of room.
I see. Well, I've got two kids, and I could imagine setting up like multiple barriers or like checkpoints to actually get to my desk to like insulate me because I have these glass doors that open inward, and it's the worst for keeping out 6 and 3 year olds.
Well, I have a 500-pound vault door that is the entrance into the freezer space here. So that's a huge door. It's probably 7 feet high, 4 feet across, weighs about 500 pounds, mounted on the concrete wall with three massive hinges. So yeah, you can definitely close yourself off from the outside world in here.
Yeah, but if the zombies attack, we'll still get videos from Dale Harrison.
Oh,
Everyone,
absolutely,
it
yeah.
will be fine. The best practices will live on. Speaking of best practices and interviewing smart people, what are some of the smart things that you talk about on LinkedIn for those that don't know you?
Uh, that's a good question. I
What
mean,
do you know? There it
most
is.
of the things I talk about are smart. Um, so I talk a lot about B2B marketing, obviously, um, and a lot about stuff around first principles and marketing effectiveness, as opposed to marketing efficiency, which is simply how fast you're burning your budget. Effectiveness is how fast you're actually getting something accomplished that the business is interested in. And and a lot of stuff around numbers. So metrics, analytics, modeling, because I come from a physics background originally. So originally I was an experimental physicist doing superconductivity work several careers ago. And along the way, I picked up an additional graduate degree in econometrics. So I've got that background and have done graduate work in statistics. So so I have probably an unusually mathematical background for someone that you would typically find in marketing.
Yeah. Well, and you're really opinionated. Me too. And so I think we're gonna have some fun here. Um,
Well,
what
I
is
wouldn't say
like
I'm
the
opinionated. I would say I have thought deeply about what I believe and why I believe it, and and the things I believe because there is solid evidence, either in the form of first principles, things that you see in the world, research work that's been done, studies that have been done, data that's available. So, if you base your beliefs on reality, it's easy to seem opinionated as opposed to wishful thinking.
yeah.
And, the sad thing with a lot of marketing is a lot of it's based on, hopes and dreams and wishful thinking and not on thinking very hard about how the world works. And specifically thinking very hard about how markets function and how buyers buy.
So what's the biggest BS out there right now? Like the something that's popularized that we're seeing all the time when we log into LinkedIn that's not based on human reality.
The list is long.
And you've got a black cat. That is the Bat Cave. I don't care what you say.
Yes, definitely a black cat who's always here. Um, the things that don't make sense. One, which is something I've talked a lot about over the last year and a half. I've only been posting on LinkedIn for less than a year and a half. But something that I've talked about a lot is this idea that there's no such thing as demand creation. You cannot create demand. That people buy because they have needs, and those needs emerge due to forces that are not in your control as a marketer. So, if and I did a recent post related to this. If you're 20 years old in college, not married, and have no kids, you know, what kind of an advertisement would convince you to go out and buy a bunch of diapers?
They're
None.
expensive.
None. I mean, because the point is, you don't have a need for diapers because you don't have a kid. And so it doesn't matter how good the marketing is. If there isn't a pre-existing need, that marketing is not going to persuade you to give somebody your money. And uh, and so there's just a lot of nonsense out there around these notions of demand gen. I mean, there are thousands and thousands of marketers who actually have the word demand generation in their title, which
Yeah.
is
Well,
absurd.
and I was going to call out like the hordes of agencies that are demand gen
Right.
agencies. And so
Now,
my follow-up question would be, if you're a marketer with a demand gen title, if you're an agency with a demand gen positioning, what are the symptoms of doing the nonsense? Like following this yellow brick road that leads to Fantasyland.
so I'll give you one good example is the whole concept of lead nurturing and lead scoring. So the core assumption behind lead nurturing is that everyone is always in market all the time. They just haven't been persuaded hard enough to buy. And your job is to keep feeding them an endless stream of lead nurturing content so that you can push them inch by inch closer to the edge of the cliff so that you can finally tip them over the edge into sales. And your lead score is supposed to be your yardstick for how close you've pushed them to the edge of the cliff so that you can tip them over into the lap of an SDR. And the reality is, this is not how people buy. People buy not because they've been persuaded into buying. They buy because something has changed in the business. And again, let's just talk about just B2B, but this is equally true in B2C. But in B2B, companies don't just randomly spend money because they saw something on Facebook. They spend money cautiously because there is not only is there a need, but that need is urgent and high value, and there is internal political consensus that is an urgent high value need that is more urgent than other urgent high value needs, and therefore deserves a front row seat in terms of getting dollars first.
Yeah.
And so the challenge of marketing is not to somehow go into companies that don't have a need or don't have an urgent need, and somehow convince them that they do have a need, because you're not going to be able to do that. And so if you talk to people who have the word demand gen in their title or who claim to be busy creating demand, what you'll see is typically one of three answers. So from them to get them to explain what they're doing. So the first answer is, well, of course we're not creating demand. We're making people aware of our brand, which is a legitimate activity. But my response is, so you have a brand and you want to make them aware of it with marketing. For 150 years, that was always called brand awareness marketing. Why do we need to invent a completely fraudulent term that implies you're doing something that you're not doing as a replacement for a term that perfectly describes what you claim to be doing, which is brand awareness marketing?
Well, I think
Just
I know the answer to that. I think I know why there are more buzzwords now than ever, and it's the MarTech companies
Oh yeah,
that are trying to sell you recycled software that everyone has access to, but they need to come up with a catchy name for it. So we get
right.
things like RevOps and demand gen, and longer ago inbound marketing, which
Yeah.
for anyone listening it just means marketing.
Right.
That's where I think it. That's where I think it comes from. And they have a bigger microphone because they don't
Well,
actually need to make money.
but there, I think there's another thing in there too, is that with the rise of the Martech companies and the rise of attribution data that we've seen progressively over the last 25 years, it becomes very easy to point to what in the old days was called direct response ads. You see an ad, you directly respond to it, and you buy something. So the only data that you can gather is direct response data. And so if the only thing you can measure with your Martech tools is that one narrow piece of marketing having to do with someone that's ready to buy right now, then it becomes hard to justify things that the Martech tool isn't measuring. And so if I ask these same demand gen marketers, why don't you just use the words that have been used for generations that perfectly describes what you're doing? Their response is, well, we can't call it brand marketing because we can't measure it. So we need to, I wouldn't get funding for what I'm doing if I called it brand marketing. To which I respond, so you are being intentionally deceptive by lying to senior management in the company about what you're doing, by making them believe that you're going to go out and somehow generate some demand, when in fact you're telling me that that that's not what you're doing. This is, how long is it going to be before the people who write the checks figure out, that you've been deceiving them? And what do you think they're going to feel about that when that occurs? And I think we've reached that point to where no one trusts, none of the grown-ups in the company trust marketing. And none of the grown-ups trust the data that marketing, tries to shove at them to justify what they're doing. And I think this is the inevitable impact of telling the people who are writing the checks that you're going to go do one thing when in fact you're not going to go do that.
Yeah, well,
Now,
it's the inevitable impact of bullshit.
of lying.
There's the episode title right there. The inevitable impact of lying.
But so there's a second group of marketers, when I raise this question, what they'll say, so the first group says, basically, of course we can't create demand. What we're really doing is brand awareness, but we can't call it that. The second group will say, of course we can't create demand. What we're trying to do is to create demand for our product. And again, that's not unreasonable. But the question then is, at what point in the history of marketing did marketers forget that the sole purpose of marketing is to get people to buy more of your stuff than they buy of the other guy's stuff? This is not demand creation. This is just called marketing.
Yeah.
I mean, marketing has absolutely no reason to exist within a business other than to get more people to buy our stuff than to buy the other guy's stuff. So, again, you are you're coming up with a fraudulent term that does not describe what you're doing. What you're doing is just marketing. And then there's a third, somewhat smaller group that is always my favorite, which is, well, there are all of these problem unaware people, and all we have to do is to make them aware of this problem that they don't know that they have, and now they will come in market and buy because, and so this group actually thinks they're really creating demand, and and my response there is granted, there are probably people that have some major, some urgent high value problem that they're completely unaware of. But if they are that dense, is this even going to be a good customer? And how many people out there that haven't already gone bankrupt are in fact that dense? Probably not a lot. And what's your chance of being able to convince them? And the example I give is, and we've all had it happen to us. We have our partner that we're living with, and we point out to our partner a about some problem they have that they weren't aware of. What's the likelihood of A, they say, "Oh, why, thank you for pointing out my problem. I will immediately change it right now,"
And
versus,
and I need to listen to you more often.
yes, versus denial, anger, depression. The whole Kubler Elizabeth Ross sequence. Uh, people that you know people that have problems and that they're completely unaware of. There are places in the world for them. I mean, it's called therapist, but most therapists can spend 5 to 10 years finally getting someone to see the problems that they have that they're not aware of. But somehow you're going to throw a Facebook ad up and do that in 5 seconds? Probably not. And so again, it's this kind of absurd example of something that really doesn't exist, and to the extent that it does exist, these are not people you want to be selling to. And again, the response I always have back is there are vastly more people who are fully aware of their problems. Why would you not want to be selling to people who know that they need to buy something versus selling to people who don't know they need to buy something? Just
Well,
there are
and
plenty of
even
people who are out there looking to buy.
and even people that are aware of their challenges, like I always say, if there's not an existing initiative, like don't hold your breath, don't waste your time. The hardest thing to do is to convince people, let alone an organization, to act.
Right.
We're really good. Like I went through months of chronic wrist pain because I'm a degenerate golfer. And I was like, I need to go to the doctor. And everyone that I was playing golf with was like, you should go see a doctor.
Yeah.
And I just avoided it forever. And organizations do the same thing. They're well aware of their challenge. But like you said, until they make that a part of their planning cadence, whether it's annual that they make decisions like that, or on a quarterly basis, unless they get together and decide that there's enough political consensus to take action, you're not going to get the deal.
Right. Well, and
So
and a good example there is you think of the biggest possible problem that an organization can have is going to be an existential problem, a problem that if it's not solved, you will literally destroy the entire organization, and the organization will not continue to exist.
like our phones spontaneously explode.
Well, but yeah, that problems do not get bigger than that. So if you look in the Fortune 1000, the most significant existential problem facing the Fortune 1000 over the last 60 years was the Y2K problem. Because if you did not fix the problem in your computer systems, it had to do with, for people that are too young to remember that era, all software that was written for many decades basically handle dates in a certain way. And the way they handle the dates caused the dates not to work after the year 2000. Because a lot of this software was written in like the 50s and 60s and 70s, and 2000 is a long ways away. So nobody worried about it. But, and what would happen is that, you know, almost all of your corporate software would fail, especially all the stuff running on the mainframes would fail as soon as the date turned over to January 1st, 2000. So this was called the Y2K problem. Well, and literally companies would not be able to invoice, they would not be able to do payroll, they wouldn't be able to manage inventory, they wouldn't be able to ship things. Everything would fail. And uh, but the thing is that every single company knew by about 1967 that the Y2K problem existed and was lurking in their systems. And every company knew the three or four primary approaches to solving the problem. And not a single company in the Fortune 1000 did a single thing to try to solve this problem until about 1997, 3 years before the Y2K problem. They went 30 years where they were fully problem aware, fully solution aware. They fully understood that this was the biggest possible problem that could ever be facing the company. And no one, because and part of it was very risky to fix it because you're far more likely to blow up things than to make things better. And because it was far enough down the road, you could just keep kicking the can down the road and making it someone else's problem, which meant it wasn't urgent. And I think the Y2K problem is a good example of, you know, people didn't buy not because they weren't aware of the problem, not because they weren't aware of the solutions, not because it wasn't, a big high value problem. They didn't buy because there wasn't sufficient urgency to have political consensus to make the purchase. And then suddenly in the last 2 to 3 years, you had this massive wholesale shift over to SAP was the primary solution for most of the big Fortune 1000 companies, where they cut all of their internal software over to SAP because SAP didn't have the Y2K problem. But but they could have done that at any point in the prior literally 30 years, and not a single company did. And so, the question then goes back to, if it's that big of a problem that's that well understood, and there was nobody, and nobody was willing to make an investment to solve the problem, why do you think, your nurturing sequence is going to fix this?
Yeah. So how do, like, on the bright side, there's still people out there doing good work, and somehow you get on the day one short list. Somehow some people are getting on the day one short list when that magical meeting occurs, and everyone decides that they're going to do something about their wrist pain. How do you posture yourself? How do you make investments that ensure, they don't delay forever? So there's got to be some degree of awareness or education that gets all of those stakeholders to say, "Oh yeah, I've heard about that." And then number two, that you're a part of the conversation or high up on the list.
Well, I mean, the first part is I don't think you can get people to feel urgency, because that happens organically inside the organization. It's not
So
something
that's
that
a
an outsider
powerful
can do.
statement that unfortunately I agree with, because it's very pessimistic for like the entire marketing industry.
Well, and I don't think it is pessimistic. What's pessimistic is, having delusional unicorn fantasies and then going into the world spending lots of money on things that are just never ever going to work. That feels pretty depressing to me. Having, a hard, brutal understanding of how reality works, and then aligning what you do to match reality, that seems pretty optimistic to me. Because now you got a chance, instead of just hoping. And but one of the things I was going to say is I've I spent 10 years selling into Fortune 500. But I've also spent quite a bit of time inside the Fortune 500s doing consulting work for global procurement groups. So I've been able to watch the internal buying process in large companies. And uh, and so one of the things that you see from, and I've been, at the table behind closed doors, on many dozens of buying committees, and watching that process. And one of the things that you see is that no one ever has any confusion about whether or not they have a problem. They know they have a problem. And no one ever has any confusion about knowing solutions. They all know solutions. Now, they may not know your solution, but they certainly know solutions. Um, and but the two big issues here is this problem doesn't live in isolation. It's competing with other problems. And so, which problem has the greatest impact on the business today? That problem is probably going to get at least priority for consideration. So just because it is an urgent high value problem doesn't mean that there isn't a more urgent or more high value problem that's ahead of it in line. And you don't get to control that. You don't even get to influence that. I mean, this is based entirely on kind of the internal vibe within the company and the collective sense of what's important and not important. The second issue is that every one of these problems has its solutions come with risk, and you would much rather be in charge of implementing a solution that works brilliantly for a low value problem than a solution that blows up for a high value problem. because because the blowback isn't going to be on the organization. I mean, there's almost nothing that an organization can buy that's so, especially if you're talking about Fortune 1000. There's nothing a Fortune 1000 company can buy that's so expensive that it will be anything other than a rounding error on the financial statements. Who gets blown up is the person responsible for the decision. So nobody wants their fingerprints on a decision that's going to blow up. And so there's this and the thing I always talk about is that no one buys on value. They buy on risk adjusted value. So there's some value to your solution coming in and solving the problem, but there's also some perceived risk. And again, you've got some control, but not total control over that risk perception. But there's some perceived risk. And I'll give you a very specific example. Really, really smart guy. So he's had some very, very high profile brand management roles. But he's also sort of gone in and out of academia. So he's a professor but also does consulting work. Most of his clients are like, I would say mid to large companies, but no one in the Fortune 1000. And so he had a former student of his who was a senior executive. He'd gone through an executive MBA program. It's a senior executive in a Fortune 500 company who really wanted to bring him in. And, and so again, you've got, awareness, trust, history, all the things you would think would be perfect. But he told this guy that I know, he told him, look, if I bring you in, nobody knows who you are. And if everyone isn't completely pleased, then that's going to come back on me. But if I bring McKinsey in, even if they do a bad job, no one's going to say a word because it's McKinsey. And said, I just can't afford to bring you in. The risk is too high. So I'm going to bring in McKinsey instead. And he said, even though I know that McKinsey isn't going to do nearly a good job, but no one's going to question my choice to bring McKinsey in. And this is how decisions are made at large companies.
Well, I do think the same underlying human behavior is present in the smallest of companies as well,
I think
down to solos.
Right. But I think the key thing is the moment you have group buying decisions, you've now socialized the buying process. And so if you're a solo, let's say you're a 3-person company and you run it, and you can make a decision based entirely on your own judgment, and you're probably going to make a decision based on how do I get the greatest value for what I'm going to have to spend to solve this problem. But if you're even a $10 million company, you now typically have group decision processes. By 100 million, almost all $100 million companies, almost all decisions are based on group buying decisions. By $1 billion, it's 100%. Nothing happens without usually interdepartmental buying committees. And so what happens there is that you've now socialized the risk and socialized the decision making within the company. That what was once your evaluation inside your own head is now something that plays out on the public stage, at least public within the organization. And so you're no longer just looking at the relative merits of the products. You're now having to look at the relative impact that the choice will have on how other people in the organization think about your competency in making that choice. And which means that and the downside there isn't the risk to the company. The downside is your personal risk, professionally within the organization, and your ability to ever get another promotion, which seriously has happened, and I've watched it happen in large companies where you get tagged with a single bad decision, no matter how good it seemed at the time. If it was bad in retrospect, and you may have been a high flyer previously, but now you're, the junior assistant country manager for Gabon, and and your career is going to go nowhere for the rest of your career, and people see that and they feel it, and this becomes a really important component of how they make buying choices. And I'll give you another statistic that points this out. If you look at uh, the general market for CRM packages, Salesforce has about 35% of the market. Microsoft Dynamics has about 25%. So about 60% between the two. HubSpot is way down the list. They're about 7% of the market. They're just a bit above Zoho. Um, uh, but they're widely used, especially in small to mid-sized companies. If you go to the Fortune 1000, Salesforce has roughly an 80 to 85% market share. Microsoft Dynamics has almost the totality of the rest of that, and the remaining slices go to primarily Oracle and Adobe. And HubSpot has something like a 0.4% market share. And the reason why is, as soon as you go into group buying, you worry about risk. And someone can look at HubSpot and look at Salesforce and say, Salesforce looks like a piece of crap. I'd much rather have HubSpot. But if I choose Salesforce, I know that no matter what happens, I won't get fired because, after all, it's Salesforce.
Yeah.
And you go back half a century ago, and there was the common refrain: nobody ever got fired for buying IBM. So this isn't anything new, because group buying decisions and socializing the buying process in large organizations has been around for, you know, since the 1800s. And so, there's nothing new that's changing this. This has been around forever. Um, but somehow, I think in the modern digital era with B2B marketing, there's this sort of notion that we just need to get 200 really big names on our ABM list, and then just spam the crap out of them, and we'll somehow be able to get into Exxon. And the fact is, you won't, because they don't buy from companies that look like you. Even if they need what you're selling, they're not going to buy from you because you're too risky. They're going to buy from, you know, Microsoft, Salesforce, Oracle, Adobe, Google. They're going to buy from a company that's as big as they are, because they know that those vendors, even if it's a crappier product at a higher price, and even if the project completely blows up, no one's going to come back and blame me for choosing Microsoft.
So it sounds like there's two takeaways for the marketers that are still listening to this. And one is being able to right size the market, to understand when you're being told to punch above your weight class, because no
Right.
amount of marketing will help you win the deal. So that's problem number one, is not being able to push back, or not having the understanding that there is a limit to what the team can sell into, regardless of people clicking on your emails or whatever it is. And then second would be the type of content that's being created. And I'm just sort of generalizing that a majority of what marketers do nowadays is create content. And if it's not product, feature, benefit, whatever, then it's problem content, to make people aware of their problem, or use cases and things like that. Rarely, if ever, do I see people really digging into the risk factors of other departments, or
Right.
addressing, the organizational risk inherent in making a buying decision. I think we talked a little bit about that last
Yeah,
time. Is
and,
like,
and I'll give you a very specific example from a former client. This is a company, actually out of Boston, and so highly funded. They were probably about 15 million into, and about 5 years into developing this product. The product was really, really cutting edge. It was to be uh, targeted into the solid organ transplant market. So it was a diagnostic product for the transplant market. It was based on technology that had come out of Harvard and Berkeley. and the company had actually spun out of this joint Harvard Berkeley research project. So you do not get better science, you do not get better technology, you do not get better IP than what this company had. It was a killer product. And so I came in to help them basically take the product to market and to go through the launch process and then help put together the sales and marketing teams and get them into revenue traction in the market. So they had been buffing up this sales deck for about 2 years, and that they were going to use to basically present the product, and it was going to drive not just the sales process but the marketing. And so this was a 75-page sales deck. The first 15 pages said nothing about the company or the product. It just went on endlessly about how brilliant the founders were and what brilliant universities they got their degrees from and what brilliant things they studied when they got their PhD and what brilliant papers they wrote and got into such brilliant journals. It was just, it was like nobody cares. And then, once they finally got into talking about the product, every single slide in this deck was about, this is the most revolutionary thing ever. This is on the cutting edge of science. Nothing like this has ever been brought to market before. Yeah, and
risk.
And, and the fact is, everything they were saying was absolutely true. This was revolutionary. It was literally the cutting edge of science. It was, nothing like it had ever come to the market before. But I remember sitting down with the CEO and I'm saying, ultimately, for this to be successful, somewhere out there is a transplant surgeon that has to decide, yes, I want to use this. And the question is, if you were a transplant surgeon, would you be willing to bet the life of your patient on the most amazing revolutionary thing that no one has ever used before? Probably not. And I said, all of this language is just scaring the shit out of people. The very people that you need to adopt the product. And I said, what we have to do is to completely invert the risk profile. And the argument that I made was you had a pre-existing technology, but it had flaws. But it was a great technology until you kind of hit a wall. And I said, the deal with this product is no one believes it's going to work because I don't have any experience with it, and you don't have anybody that's been using it. But so you're not going to be able to convince people to jettison what they've been using and replace it with this. But if you tell them, we know the old technology that you've been using, there are cases where it fails, where you cannot get an answer. This was having to do with diagnosing the particular virus that was infecting the patient, that because you get a lot of issues with infection and transplants. We know that this platform will be able to correctly identify that virus no matter what. So what you sell them is, this is the hat that you can pull a rabbit out of when no one's expecting a rabbit. That this is what you turn to when your existing technology isn't giving you an answer, because this will give you an answer. And so then the question is, can you take the risk of not having this available if the existing technology doesn't give you an answer? You are betting the life of your patient on deciding not to have this platform available to you in the event that the existing technology won't give you an answer, because we know this one will. So you've now completely 180'd the risk equation, and you've gone from making this the riskiest thing they could possibly do to making not buying it the riskiest thing they could possibly do.
Yeah, my dad always said, you take the reason they can't buy and you make it the reason they have to buy.
Yeah. And no one in B2B, especially in B2B technology, seems to be thinking this way. They're so enamored with the shiny thing and again, a lot of my work has been in biotech. And you see the same thing even worse in biotech. You have these scientists that produce this amazing thing, and it's like, I have this thing. It's amazing. Everyone, people should be shoving POs under our door at night as soon as they find out it exists. And the deal is, no, that's not how the world. It's not how the world works. I mean,
Well,
it's
there's so many examples of it. I mean, there not an original movie comes out maybe once every 3 years. They're all just remakes of something that was successful in the past. So it's
yeah,
the same thing happening in show business. Everyone's just eliminating risk, and it's like, well, hey, look, who knew that Frozen 7 would have tanked? You know, the
don't
kids
blame
love this
me.
shit. So um,
But but
I get it.
but you have to get deeply inside the head of the person that has to make that buying decision, and you have to
Yeah.
understand what their pressures are that go way beyond simply making a logical evaluation of features.
Yeah. Well, and so this I make this point a lot. Like, do not hire an agency. Don't even hire a marketer unless you have direct access to the people that you want to buy from you, and go talk to them. Like, step one is go talk to them. Hey, would you ever buy something like this? How would you go about doing it? Like, people, for some reason, they don't pick up the telephone,
Well,
or they don't pay someone to, like, hey, can I ask you a few questions? They just want to progress in La La Land that they've created the next
right.
revolutionary thing.
Yeah, let me check what my persona would do.
Yeah, like we did a persona profile. Like, how many of them did you talk to? In
Yeah.
fact, that was the first lesson I ever got as a very young entrepreneur destined for multiple failures, as we all are. I got lucky enough to be in front of an investor in college, had the idea, and their first question was, "Great, how many people have signed up to buy this?" And it's like, no, you don't understand. It's a great idea. You should give us money, and then we'll do a bunch of marketing, and then everyone will buy it. They're like, yeah, but who said they're gonna buy it?
Right.
And it just, as a kid, it went right over my head. And now that I'm a little bit more grown up, I'm like, okay, that's like the really important question.
Well, and I'll tell you a direct story. So, quite a number of years ago, I was pulled in to do a restructuring and turnaround on a company. So I came in as the CEO, and they had production and product problems, but they really had sales and marketing problems, and especially marketing problems. And so they had 4% market share in a five-way market. So there were five major competitors in the market, and they had 4% market share. So and the marketing was just beyond awful. And so one of the things that I realized early on, so very first thing I did when I came on board was I got on a plane and I spent 2 weeks in the field because I had 8 field salespeople, mostly East Coast, West Coast. And so I flew to the West Coast, then I flew to the East Coast, and I visited all of our major accounts, in conjunction with my field sales team. And you know, and I would hear the salespeople talk, and I would listen to the customers talk. And one of the things that the salespeople would always talk about was that basically they're embarrassed to hand out any of the marketing collateral that gets sent to them because, as one of them said, they don't even use the right words. And and I could very clearly see that. And and the marketing team back at the company was just completely in a bubble. And not a single one of them had ever actually seen a real live customer in their natural habitat. And so one of the things I initiated was what I call the hostage exchange program. And so I required every single person in marketing to rotate into the field twice a year to spend 1 week with a field sales rep calling on actual customers. And then I required the field sales team to rotate 1 week a year. So the marketing had to go 2 weeks a year into the field. Sales, I pulled them in 1 week a year. And they had to sit in on marketing meetings and they had to help man the customer support phones because I wanted the salespeople to hear the complaints that came in when the promises they made didn't actually happen because they overpromised. But I also wanted them sitting in on the marketing meetings so they could pipe up and say, that's not even the words people use. this is how they describe this. That's not even a problem anyone has. These are the problems people have, and it was transformative. And then the other thing with the marketing people is I wanted them to see. We were selling into labs. I wanted them to see the inside of the labs, to see how these people live, to see what the environment physically around them looked like, and to talk to real live people that are actually using the product. And let me say, it was transformative. And I have subsequently have applied the same hostage exchange program idea multiple times since then. And it is always transformative because what happens is you think about how personas are typically created. You have a group of people sitting in a closed room, none of which have ever actually seen a real live customer, none of which have ever actually talked to a real customer, with no salespeople because they never have a salesperson in these rooms, and they're sitting around trying to ideate what they imagine a customer should look like, and it is like fan fiction. It's like really bad fan fiction, and it is just disconnected from reality. Yeah, and you see the same thing with points-based lead scoring. How does a lead scoring system get invented? You have a bunch of people who've never actually seen or talked to a real live customer sitting around amongst themselves in a room, ideating about how many points should we assign downloading a crappy ebook versus how many points for looking at the about page, on the basis of nothing other than just pulling it out of thin air. And as a result, we see, what we end up with is an industry, that has a 0.2% MQL to, qualified opportunity conversion rate. Where almost everything they send to marketing is garbage.
No. Or send to sales is garbage.
I'm sorry, almost everything that marketing sends to sales in the form of an MQL is complete garbage. I mean, it's such garbage in such volume that in the last 10 or 15 years, sales organizations have been forced to set up an entirely separate organization inside of sales whose sole job is to protect sales from bad marketing. And this is the SDRs.
Yeah.
Because their job is to take this crap load of garbage that comes over in the form of MQLs, sift through it, trying to find something that represents an actual customer that is actually buying, who is worth sending over to have an AE, invest a significant part of their time in. So you literally have an entirely new group inside sales whose sole job it is to clean up the mess that you get from the badly thought through, badly scored MQLs. And again, the problem isn't the MQL. The problem is how you scored it. The problem is how you made that decision that this was good enough to send over to sales.
Yeah.
And the point is if you're using personas and points-based lead scoring, it's all based on guesses, highly uninformed guesses. And so it's not surprising that most of what comes out of that process is going to be garbage.
It's too much guessing. You know what? I create a lot of fun names for like podcasts and shows about things. And a friend of mine in a conversation, he said, most marketing today is just liquor and guessing. And I thought to myself, one day someone I know will start that show, because I already got Beers with Max. I'm set. But if I could go back in time, I do think liquor and guessing would be like the number one marketing podcast. And you and I could just beat up on fan fiction all day, and made up stuff. Yeah, let's not do things that are made up. I mean, that's a good policy. That's my takeaway from today. Dale, wow, what an awesome time! You're welcome back. I feel like we could do this 4 more times over. Yeah, for those of you listening or binging on Beers with Max, don't operate any heavy machinery. Tip your waitress. Have fun. Dale, is it LinkedIn? We can find you on LinkedIn. Is that right?
Yep, Dale W. Harrison.
Okay. Do you have a mailing address you want to give people, or is there any other things you want to point people at, like a YouTube channel?
On LinkedIn. I'm easy to find. I'm always there.
From the Meat Locker. Until next time, Dale Harrison. Cheers.
Good.